Well, welcome to the podcast today. Yes, we have another amazing guest, but this one, again, he is from Sydney, Australia. He's a former journalist and news reporter. These days, he's an entrepreneur and has just launched one of the biggest, you would call, launches in Australian news history, a global news service, and it's just hit the waves. Welcome to the show, Cameron Price. How are you, mate?
I'm good, Rob. Thank you. That's very kind. It's a lot to live up to.
Mate, I'm sure I've watched your newsreels. I did a bit of stalking before I got you on the show.
Okay.
And if anything go by your past work, I don't think you'll have much of a problem with making this a success.
Thanks, mate. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting. This is actually my first podcast. You are my very first. I've been within the bounds of the various networks I've worked for, and they were pretty careful about who we could and couldn't talk to. So, I'm excited. It'll be fun.
So where did you grow up?
Brizzy. Yeah, south side of Brisbane, Sunnybank Hills, Broncos fan.
You admit it?
Yeah, not so much anymore, but Noosa for school holidays, Early Beach every now and then. Yeah, God's country.
God's country. Were you a good student?
My dad was a teacher, so I didn't really have a choice, but it wasn't through talent. It was through being forced into sheer work.
So what did you do? Did you go to journalist school when you left uni, or did you just bum around?
So the plan was the dream was to play sports professionally. Yeah. And I wasn't good enough. Let's face it. And so I kind of started looking towards the end of school at what types of careers you could have in and around sports that weren't necessarily involved in playing sports. And it's pretty limited, really. But I kept on coming back to being a sports journalist. I went and did some work experience at the Courier Mail. Loved it. Just loved every minute of it. Going out to training of various sports teams, and just kind of being in a newsroom. It felt right for me. And I mean, I was not real good at English, and I remember on my careers counselling saying that I wanted to be a journalist, and I remember getting called up to the office, and the English teacher was there, and the careers counsellor was there, and they kind of said to me, "Are you sure? Are you sure that this is what you want to do?" And I said, "Yeah," and pressed on with it. And it's funny. I actually still stay in touch with that English teacher, and every time I got a new job, I'd send her, I won't name her, but I'd send her a note. I'd say, "Hey, just to let you know that, I've gone over to London to work for B Sky B, or just to let you know, I'm over in Perth covering MH370 and just did a live cross to CNN." And she was lovely about it, but it was kind of one of those things that when someone tells you that you can't do something, it drives you even harder to do it.
So was it hard to get your first professional gig?
It's funny because I studied print, so I never really saw myself as a TV journal. I didn't really have that goal. I really liked the written word, and that was what I focused on in uni. But then right towards the end of my degree, we had a guest lecture from one of the newsreaders up at 9 in Brizzy.
Yep.
And it was fascinating, and I remember going up to him at the end of the lecture and kind of introducing myself, and he said, "We should come up and do a week of work experience." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And so the work experience at the Courier Mail was in school. I was in grade 10. The work experience at 9 was in my final year of uni. And the difference was the thing about print journalism is you can be in the newsroom and there can be a story that you're covering, and you can make some calls from the newsroom, and you never really have to go there. You never really have to be on the scene, be at the location. Whereas for TV, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to be there. You have to be, you know, at the floods, you have to be in the courtroom, you have to be at the crime scene. And I remember thinking and going to do a week of work experience at 9 and just thinking, oh, this is incredible. This is, you know, more than what I could possibly have thought that a career would be. And it's a pretty considerable pivot in your last semester of uni to say, actually, no, I'm not going to do print. I want to do TV. But from that work experience, I got a role at Win Toowoomba and incredibly lucky because the types of rates of people getting jobs out of J school are really, really low. But I got lucky, right time, right place, and went to Toowoomba, and I was utterly awful as a TV journo for a good 12 months because I'd had no coaching, no voice training, no screen training, and had not learned how to write for TV. I actually still don't know why they gave me the job, but I never forget my boss calling me into the office about 6 weeks in, and she said, "Cam, I'm really sorry, but you're just not cut out for this. This is not you. You don't sound right. You don't look comfortable. I think maybe you should consider doing something else." And again, a bit like the English teacher, I went away and every single night that I was home from work, I would record the news and I would match the voice of Bruce Page. Every single tone I would match. And so I basically learned a news voice in about 3 months and just forced myself to become good at the job. And probably I think it was about 12, 18 months in. There's a really fascinating story up in Toowoomba about how they were planning on recycling sewage into drinking water. And it was a global story. And I had a really great relationship with the mayor up there, Di Thorley, and she just kept on giving me stories, and it got me enough exposure in Toowoomba, and the boss from Nine Brizzy called and said, "All right, it's time to come back down the hill."
You've just given us 2 examples of someone told you couldn't do, and you went, "No, I'm going to do." Where did that inspiration come from? Is there someone in your life that instilled that in you, or there's something that must have happened that you've got that from? Because a lot of kids would just throw the towel in and walk away and go and work something else, but you are different.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that was something that came from my upbringing, that you just don't take no for an answer. You just keep going. And a big part of my upbringing was my grandma on my dad's side, and everything in life was a competition. Everything from who could do the dishes quicker to every single time we played cards, it was focused on winning. And when it comes down to it, journalism and a whole lot of facets of life are a competition. And if you can push yourself, you don't have to necessarily win, but you just have to push yourself to not lose. I think that takes people a long way. And it's a funny thing taking motivation from rejection, but I think it's actually a really good approach to not just a career, but to a lot of facets of life, that if you believe in something, just don't take no for an answer.
So you mentioned before about B Sky B. Where do they fit into the puzzle?
Yes. So I was I think 23 or 24. I'd had a couple of years at Nine in Brisbane, and I was just really, really, I was just young.
Yeah.
And a few of my mates had gone over to the UK, and they were just pulling beers in bars, and I was at Nine in Brizzy and working my way up through the rungs of the newsroom, and I just kind of got itchy feet, and I just said to the boss that I just wanted to go and take 12 months off to just go and travel the world, and just I wouldn't get another chance to do it again. And he graciously agreed, but he said under two conditions. The first is that you agreed to do some work in journalism over there.
Yep.
And the second is when I tell you to come back, and he used some expletives, you come back. And so, yeah, I hopped on a plane. I think I worked 2 shifts in a bar as a glassy and on about £6 an hour. And then an email came through introducing me to the head of world news at Sky in London, Neil Dunwoody, who was an Aussie, a connection through my boss. And so, yeah, I think I went and met them after a shift, and he said to me that a freelance rate for a producing shift here is £250, which would have taken me about a month to make in the pub. So I started producing there, and then it was an overnight shift, so it was 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. So it was a pretty rough shift.
Graveyard shift.
The world news ran at, I think, 5 a.m. And so you'd produce the stories overnight to go on world news, and then you'd produce through the start of the morning news. But it was funny because I'd been there a couple of weeks and just doing shifts, and then I got a call from the foreign desk editor at 9 in Sydney and said, Are you at B Sky London? I said, yeah. He goes, I need a favor. I said, what's up? And he goes, we've just missed a feed. I think it was something about Nigerian schoolgirls getting kidnapped. He said, we're on air in 20 minutes. Can you go into News Exchange and get them to send the feed out? And so I kind of wandered into News Exchange, and they were all half asleep, and said, can we patch this out to 9 in Sydney? And pressed a few buttons, and off it went, and didn't think anything more of it. And then the next day, an invoice landed in my inbox, and it was £250 for services rendered for Channel 9 Australia for what was 5 minutes work. So yeah, and so from that moment, I started doing work for 9 in London. I really started covering some stories, so I'd put a voice over a package, and then I managed to convince some of the editors to help me cut it, and managed to convince the overnight crew with a few, dinners and bottles of wine that they could occasionally shoot me a piece to camera. So in the end, I ended up as a foreign correspondent for 9 in London for the better part of 6 months, which was beyond anything that I had ever thought that I would be able to do. But yeah, I covered some incredible stories, and just through, again, right place, right time. But it was an interesting time for 9 because they just shut down their bureau over there. So they needed someone, and I was there. I could do it for them. And yeah, rest is history.
So what was your biggest challenge when you were over there, being an Aussie in London? You don't know the place, and you've just ended up a reporter. Now, most reporters know their turf, know the streets, know the people. You knew nothing apart from a couple of nights in the bar. So how'd you make it work? I mean,
I think London for me was the realization that the world is a lot bigger than Brisbane, and I love Brizzy. It will always be home, but London is a big, bustling, busy, but also it's a bad town. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of problems in that city, and a lot of crime, and for someone who was walking the streets quite often, late at night and going to locations to do a live cross at 2 or 3 a.m. London time, and you're sitting with $50,000 or $60,000 worth of camera equipment, and having to hire security guards for us just to do live crosses in the middle of London. That for me was an eye opener that there can be elements of poverty that are not are not easy to deal with, but also I think it just forced me to grow up. I was still a kid when I went over there, but when I came back to 9 in Brizzy, it was almost the moment I got back, I just took on a whole lot more responsibility. I was going from just covering, standard stories to I was kind of their go-to guy for floods and fires and cyclones, which, in the end became probably my main, the main thing that I felt that I did best was disaster coverage. And that really stemmed from that time in London and coming back to Brisbane as not just another number in the newsroom.
So was it a different feeling walking back in the newsroom in Brisbane after spending so much time overseas. And a lot of people have that moment in their life, in business and in life, where they have 12 months of what we would call exponential growth. You've now come back, you've been overseas, you've seen a different side, and you're looking through the world from a different set of lenses from what you left. What was it like those first couple of weeks back in Brizzy?
It's funny. So the first day I got back, the boss said, just come on in, drop your things off, and I think I'd landed in the morning. I'd quickly popped over to see my parents, and then he said, just come in, drop your things off, and we'll see you tomorrow. And so I'd gone to the office, still had a bit of a beard from a few days off, and I think I'd lobbed there late afternoon, and I walked in the newsroom, said hello to everyone, and then I was about to walk out, and the chief of staff said, "Oh, Cam, you got lead story life cross." And I was like, okay. I said, I think I've got a suit in the bag somewhere. He's like, yep, great. Take it down to wardrobe, get it pressed, and then jump in the helicopter because you're on the story, lead story. And I said, oh, okay. What is it? He goes, it's a runaway cow causing traffic chaos.
Oh, no.
I thought, okay, I've just come back from covering, train derailments and large-scale manhunts and, the UK election, and I've come back to a cow causing traffic chaos. But it was different because I kind of got to take ownership of some stories. So especially around the disaster space, I could kind of say to the boss, I've got a bag packed, I'll go. And that probably, it wasn't long after I got back that I covered the Grantham Floods, which was I didn't really realize it at the time, but that's probably the biggest story. Not the biggest in terms of worldwide coverage, but biggest as in, as a journalist, the most difficult but yet significant story I had to cover. And
so how was that different to the Lint Cafe?
Lint
and for
Cafe
those people leaving overseas that are listening, that was the when someone took the hostages in the middle of Sydney in the Lint Chocolate Cafe, and everyone held their breath for quite a long time.
Yeah, Lint Cafe was probably the most the longest I've been on the air for a period of time, but also a story where you just didn't know a lot of details. The difference with Lint and Grantham I was at 9, and in a time when there wasn't really 24-hour news, there wasn't really hourly updates. This was 2010, so your entire day was dedicated to gathering a package for 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And so it was the storytelling element, the speaking to people, the getting the pictures, and to crafting a script, which Grantham for me just it was such a tragedy and such an unusual moment in time. I think it was a 1 in 1,000 year rain event that they had a 3 months worth of rain in half an hour, and that was the focus, was gathering and crafting a story and doing this, this tragedy justice in telling these people's story, because no one else, we were the only crew in Grantham, no one else could get in, and so we were really trying to show the world what had happened here. Lint was different because I was with Sky, so and with Sky we had affiliates with CNBC and CNN, so I was doing a cross for Sky on the top of the hour, and then at 10 minutes past the hour I'd do a hit with CNBC, and then 20 minutes past the hour I'd do a hit with B Sky B, and then half past I'd do CNN. It was just incessant, and not just for 2 or 3 hours, but it was for, I think I did my first cross at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and I did my last cross at 6 a.m. the following morning. And it was, as a journo, you have some sources, and I had a few sources in police and was getting some information, but we weren't close enough to be able to see too much of what was going on, and there was just so much misinformation. There's, early on that there was the reports that there were various bombs planted around the city, and that was a real line, and then as to whether there were more than one hostage, rather more than one hostage taker in the Lint Cafe. But there were some moments in that particular story which were, haunting is probably the only word I can use. The first is, I was on the air when the manager of the cafe was killed, and I remember saying, because we were quite some distance away, we were probably about 100 meters down the road, as close as you could get from the police cordon. And I remember hearing something that sounded to me like a door slamming. And I remember pausing on the air and said, that sounded like a gunshot. And then it would have been, and the questions kind of continued, and they were like, have you heard anything else? And I said, nah, but that immediately registered as a gunshot. And this was pretty late at night, and all of a sudden I've kind of turned around, and because we were looking down Phillip Street, which you could see down the side of the Lint Cafe, and I've seen all the lights, which look like about 20 torches flash on, which was from the special ops team about to go in. And next minute there's been a police officer which has come out from behind one of the columns near where all the media were standing, and they've just started yelling, get down, get down. And I, dumbstruck, I just kept watching as they went in, and you talk about the sound of gunfire and the sound of grenades and the like going off, and it was, I'll never forget it. It was it was, and then I remember the producer saying to me, as they were kind of in the aftermath when we were running through it, saying to me, count the ambulances, and that will be a way that you can kind of get an idea as to how many victims there were, because there was so little information coming out. And there were probably a dozen ambulances that came and went, and I wasn't saying on the air, we've seen a dozen ambulances, but in the back of my head I was thinking, geez, there's a dozen victims here. But that was one of the
So that
was one of the bigger days
for people in a normal job or people in business. That'd be one of the most high pressure situations you could be in for your job, live with an event like that going on. How do someone like you, maintain focus and a clear head when it doesn't matter if you're running a takeaway food store, or if you're doing something, you can say or do something at that moment that you can't take back, especially like you were live on air. How did you maintain focus, and how did you keep your mind on the job with so much happening around you?
I've never been comfortable on live TV. It is a terrifying experience being live on the air. It does get easier, but I can tell you, and thousands and thousands of live crosses later, that every single time I looked down the barrel preparing to go live, I was petrified. And it was, you just find coping mechanisms to try and make sure you don't stuff up, because it's.
Do you think being scared made you focus?
See, I would often say this to younger journos, that you can use nerves in two ways. You can use nerves and they can control you, and you can have that shaky voice, and you can, you can black out and kind of forget what you were meant to say, and have a what we call dying on the air, which is not fun. But you can also use nerves to perform better, and they are actually a performance enhancing drug if you can channel them in the right way.
How true.
And so it's it's not a kind of something that I ever practiced, but I just found ways to turn nerves into helping me, but also I was just really regimented in a live cross what I was what I was doing. I always had notes. I always kept like a piece of paper taped to the bottom of the camera. So if I lost my place, I would have little prompts that, it doesn't look like, if you're looking down the barrel and you just look below, people can't really tell.
So you had a process.
Yeah, you just try and limit the chances that it can go terribly wrong. Which if you can, then but on something like a rolling live coverage, I always felt like that was easier because you weren't often with a live cross, you'll get like a 30 or a 40-second slot where you just have to talk about something that you've happened earlier in the day or something you've learned. And I always found that really difficult because if you lose your spot, then you're in a world of trouble. But with something that's rolling, you're just kind of thinking 5 seconds ahead and you're talking to the scene where you're at and you're talking to what's happening. And I always found that far easier because you could just have a conversation. It wasn't practiced. It wasn't too formal. It was just describing the scene, describing what you knew, describing the information that you were getting. I always found that far easier. And Lint Cafe was an odd one because a lot of the information we were getting was blinkered. We were told things, but then told things and then said, please don't report that. And I think it was because it was such an unusual. I mean, I got word of the special forces had been carrying out practice drills to assist with the operation really early on in the day, and was told do not report that. Quite often, when you saw the tactical operations police lining up alongside, we would see that, and we were told do not report it because Man Monis might, or who we thought was inside, might have access to media reports and might be able to listen into the reports that if police were gathering or if we'd witnessed something happening, that he might be able to get intel from that. And so we were told just keep it really, really down the line. And yeah, that was one of the more challenging days in the job.
One of the biggest we got criticisms of the press, and it's now seeped its way into business, is trust and ethics. These days, a lot of the commercial stations are more intent on giving their opinion on a news piece rather than saying what some of the old newsreaders was, we're here to read the news, you're not interested in our opinion. And that's the way a lot of us, would like to see it. How does a reporter build trust and maintain his ethics? Because it's no different than being in business. You've got to sell yourself to someone who doesn't know you. You've got to gain someone's trust very quickly. And if you don't have good ethics, you can either get a very bad name where people won't trust you, or if you're known as someone that's ethical, you'll find out more information than a lot of others will. So how does someone these days, irrespective if you're a reporter or not, in modern times now, build trust and maintain his ethics at the same time?
Great question. I think two facets to that. I think the first thing, and I always tried to do this with any source or any contact, was you just have to be honest and you have to be straight up with a source. If they're telling you something and you're, quite often sources are telling you things because they want you to report on it. And they want it out there. They just don't want their name associated with it. And if you're straight up with them and say, this is a cracking story, but this isn't a story without you or someone else talking about it, then I think they understand that and they respect that. And it's the same in business. I mean, journalism has a lot of things that translate well to the business world. And I think especially to the startup world and the fundraising world, where I think in business, if you're speaking to an investor or you're speaking to a potential partner, you just have to be straight up. And even if they're proposing something that is worthwhile, I will often say, look, I think that's a great idea, and I think it's something we'd love to do, but come and see us again in 2 or 3 years, because this is way too soon for us. And the second facet is, I think you have to pick your battles and pick the people that you are willing to protect. I had some brilliant sources and sources in places that I built up, sources in defense and sources in politics, and I never ever burned them, and I never ever told anyone who they were. But then you have sources that, political sources are always a tricky one to, and you pick your battles as to when you need to protect a source, and when you just when you try and find a way around the information that someone's given to you to get it out there.
A lot of people in business now have forgotten the word ethics and betray your trust. And I don't know why they've gone down that way, but they seem to have a short life in their job, but it gets burnt. Over your time, how did you know if you could trust someone or not? Or they weren't just using you to put a false story out, which then would make you look bad? I mean, this happens in sales, it happens in business everywhere. But from a personal experience, how did you know, could you trust someone?
Yeah, I got it wrong plenty of times.
Yeah, we all have.
I mean,
we all have.
I probably more often than not went with my gut. And if you could, you would try and verify it. You would try and ring someone that or speak to someone who would know. But yeah, I mean, the problem with people is we believe what we're told, and it's the human condition that if someone is telling us something, we're inclined to take that as the truth. And I think that if someone is trying to do something to breach your trust, well, that will come out in the wash eventually. And what's that saying? Burn me once, fool on me, burn me twice, fool on you. So
that's true. That's true. So you've now made a big shift. What was your aha moment? You've now gone into one of the most cutthroat industries, is in owning your own news service. What was the moment when you decided to do it? And how did a guy who was just a journalist and a producer end up being able to do what he's got to do now?
Yeah, I must be mad, I think.
No, not at all. You backed yourself.
Yeah, I never expected that I wouldn't be a career journo. Yeah. I think that I had visions of being in this game for a lot longer, and this never felt like a job. I always felt to me like a hobby. I really loved the nature of crafting a story, but increasingly I would have people come up to me on the streets when we were covering a story and say, I don't watch the news anymore. And I would say to them, okay, well, and in the back of my mind, I would think, yeah, me neither. And I would say to them, oh, why? What's happened? And they say, oh, well, I'm not home at 6, or there's too many car crashes in the news, or there's not enough good news, or I'm sick of seeing stories about this, and increasingly I thought that there's been so much good disruption in the broadcast space. I mean, Netflix has disrupted programmable TV really well. KO's disrupted sport. Everything now is about convenience and on demand, and news has not really evolved. And we were still expecting people to be sat on their couch at 6 o'clock and watch what a handful of people sitting in a room in the CBD thought they should be told. And I started to think that that we needed to do things differently. And I had some conversations with the networks that I was at, and I kind of got the feeling that there was this intrinsic belief that things would turn around, that the dwindling viewer numbers and that the dwindling balance sheets would at some stage change, but they weren't going to try anything different. There was just no imagination to try and develop a way out of what was essentially people abandoning what had been one of the pillars of journalism was the nightly broadcast news.
You think it was a fear of change in the major networks?
I think they'd just forgotten how to invent. I think they'd just become so used to things being the way that they were, and the ratings came in at 10 o'clock and, we had 1.2 million people watch and 9 beat us by 60. That there was just no thought about what are we going to be like in 10 years when there is no channels, there is no TV guide. What do we do then? What's our business model? What's our plan?
I mean, YouTube now run the best of.
Yeah.
Like a miniature news service when you go onto them.
Yeah. And so the second thing that struck me was I was in an airport lounge in the States coming back from a story, and I was trying to get a news story on the AFL Grand Final. And I'm not a big AFL fan, but Sydney was playing, and a whole bunch of my mates are Sydney fans. So I was just trying to it was about 6 hours after the game had been played, and none of the various social media algorithms had slated me as an AFL fan. So I couldn't find it anywhere. Yeah. And with all the geo-blocking, it took me a good 5 or 10 minutes to find some video highlights of the game. And I started to think that the way that we assign people's interests for an entertainment sense, things like YouTube or Facebook, the algorithmic delivery of interests in a yes, Rob's interested in business, no, Rob's not interested in home renovations, that works for interests. But when you come to news, it's very different. People's news interests aren't black and white. They're not yes or no. They're not so binary. They're actually far broader than that. People have they might be obsessed with something and they want every single piece of news that they can get on it, or they might only be relatively interested in cryptocurrencies, or maybe they're just not interested at all in sports, but they're probably going to want to know who won the Melbourne Cup, or who wins the AFL Grand Final, or who wins the 100 meters final. And the yes and no, black and white that's assigned on algorithms, it doesn't work. And so I started coming up with a bit of a plan for what I call a sliding scale interest level, where you're not assigned yes or no, you're basically assigned a value of interest, and that determines the types of stories that you get, and that does two things. First, it's a far better way to watch a personalized news bulletin, but the second thing that it does, we've got so many problems with people going down a rabbit hole and getting into extremism because they only see one very narrow slice of news, and there's nothing outside of that band. And a sliding scale of this nature, you will receive things outside of your narrow worldview.
Yep.
And that in turn helps to assist with the things that you like, your judgments that you're able to make on various issues. And that's the underlying basis for what I came up with. Initially, I wanted to sell it as something that news networks would implement in their own platforms. Look, here's a better way to personalize news. But increasingly, I realized that the only way that this can be done and done properly is to have essentially a news marketplace, an independent platform that brings in an aggregated source of news from hundreds and hundreds of different sources and distills it into someone's, much the same as Netflix does for entertainment and documentaries and movies and shows. It would be the same for a news bulletin. So a personalized news bulletin from multiple sources from across the world, that underneath it all is that convenience factor that it can be 5 minutes when you're on the bus on the way into work. It can be 10 minutes when you get home and the pasta's boiling, you flick it on the TV, here's your news, Rob, in 10 minutes. And that is the, that is the dream. That is the goal of what it can be. And it's, where it is at the moment. I'm thrilled to have it out, and I'm thrilled that people are enjoying using it. And for me, this is the very base level of what it can be. But we have to start somewhere, and I'm excited about the next couple of years ahead.
So I gather you had to go and get investors, and because there's no studio full of egos and hairdressers in the modern age.
Yeah.
How hard was it? You're a journalist. People looking to go, well, he just stood in front of the camera. He's come to me saying, I want you to invest $100,000 in a news service that no one knows about. It's not proven. It's a gamble. How did you break those barriers down to get people to say, well, we're going to back this person?
See, I think we had a bit of an unusual experience with fundraising. I hear these stories about people, having a rough time, and we certainly had our fair share of rejection. But we opened our pre-seed round early this year on a Monday morning, and we had a term sheet by 5 o'clock that afternoon for the whole round.
Wow.
Which I just think we picked an investor that had experience in the media space, and they just got it straight away. And they just said to us, please take this. Don't talk to anyone else. We are your investors. And that for us, because I get it. It's a tricky space. You're right. Media is, we're a small fish swimming in a big ocean, but there's so much space for disruption in news, because there's just so much dissatisfaction with how people get their news content. You so often hear people saying, I don't read the newspaper anymore. I can't get my news off Facebook. I mean, the Reuters Institute study came out, and the numbers and you talked about trust, and people say 26% only 26% of people say they trust Facebook to give them the news. Yeah, 1 in 3 Australians.
Is it that much, is it?
1 in 3 Australians get their news content from Facebook. That's the top news source. Oh. So how do you deliver something that people feel comfortable in trusting? Well, there's a couple of steps. First is obviously you need to have trusted providers, but I think one of the things that the tech age has done is you take the decision making out of people's hands. The algorithm that works in a dark office in Silicon Valley decides what you should see. But for us, we flipped it around. We have put every lever of control in your hands. So there is countless decisions you can make on your interest. It's on a sliding scale. The publishers you don't want to see, the publishers you do want to see. Do you want local news? You know what? We put the ultimate choice in your hands, so you feel like you are in control of your news selection, not an algorithm. And I think that can that regain some trust in how people feel comfortable with consuming news. The early signs are, yes, people do feel a lot more comfortable with it.
So when did you launch Lead Story?
So we went to a soft launch at the start of this month. I think it's 3 weeks. 3 weeks tomorrow, and we just put out a few little social media posts. We didn't want to make too much of a song and dance. We got a little bit of publicity. We got some great articles in Umbrella and Tech Guide, and just wanted to test it. We didn't want to have, it's the dream, and my CTO wouldn't like me saying this, but I was like, let's get as many people on there straight away. He's like, well, it will break. And so we just did what we called a soft launch, but it's been beyond what I had hoped for, because from my personal consumption habits, I know that I will use this on my phone and my TV. So
it will be available on television.
Yeah, that's the idea. TV by Christmas.
Yes.
We signed a deal with Samsung and LG, so it will be sitting next to Netflix and YouTube on your little panel on your home screen. And the idea is that it's going to be an education process to get people used to watching news digitally again, because they're so used to reading news. But we know 4 in 5 people prefer video news. It's just that they've become out of habit to consuming it in a digital way. So I've mobile app's out next month. Connected TV app is out towards the end of the year. 70% of our users are in the US, which is really exciting for us. I think the biggest thing for us over the next 6 months is we just need as much content as we possibly can. And for content providers, the sell that we're saying is that, well, we're not going to name names, but you can publish your content to other platforms and get less than 2 cents in the dollar. Or with us, in terms of your advertising return, we want to funnel as much revenue back into newsrooms as we can. And so you'll get 10 cents in the dollar. And that from me coming from a journo background and coming from a newsroom, they are dying, they are crying out for capital. And there wouldn't be a journalist in the country in a broadcast newsroom that's had any more than CPI increase in salary in the last 5 years. And the hope is that we can try and change that.
So you mostly just stay with commercial networks, or will there be room as you develop to do for freelancers to submit stories to you to go up on the network? Yeah,
so we all of the above. I really like the idea of community journalism. One of the features that we built into the platform, and we were really trying to come up with ideas of how to help local news, because it's such an important part. It's how I got my start in the industry. People are interested in what's happening around them. But at the moment, we keep hearing about local newspapers being shut down. Yeah. Local newsrooms losing staff left, right, and center. And so we came up with this idea of essentially overlaying news articles on a map. And so you could go to your town, or you could go to your suburb.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It's funny because it was something that we came up really late in the piece in the development cycle, and it's almost now our most popular feature. And the idea behind it is that people are interested in local news. They just don't have a way to access it in an engaging way.
No, they don't.
And for the idea of the freelance, for the idea of the community journalist, the citizen journalist, posting, hey, I'm here on the scene of, this considerable news story, I'm on my phone, and having a platform and a way to upload it. Yeah, that's on our roadmap. And I think that's a really exciting part of what we're planning on doing.
So lead story, 5 years time, are you going to be sitting there next to Sky News as generating a lot of interest, or where do you see yourself?
Yeah, I was reading an interesting article today about having short-term pessimism and long-term optimism. And I think that's a really good way of how my mind works in terms of the business, that I have to constantly question what we're doing to motivate myself to run faster in these early days. But the vision of what this could become, and the social change that it could enact, and the idea of a news bulletin, a personalized news bulletin from hundreds and hundreds of different providers around the world that is distilled into something that matters to you in a snackable, bite-sized, easy to consume, on-demand piece of content.
Yeah.
That is the dream. And it's interesting because people talk about where they see their company in 5 years. We're going to IPO, or we'll be at our Series C. I will be happy if we are number 2 next to Netflix on your home screen on your TV, and that it's it's a habitual consumption method. Google, tell me my lead stories. And
SEO is a massive push, isn't it?
Yeah. That will be considered for mine a success if we are something that people turn to as a source of a habit. There's enormous potential. I've had a crash course in being a business owner, but I got to say I'm loving it.
So we're going to wind up here, but I'm going to ask you something. Can I have you back on in 12 months where you sit here and tell us all about how it's gone?
Yeah, of course. I might be asking you for a job, but you never know.
Oh, I don't think so. I might be asking you for a job, or I might have to be pitching a show to you to put on your entertainment channel.
Of course. Glad to.
Mate, second last question.
Hmm.
Put your old reporter's hat back on. If I gave you the choice of interviewing two people who are still alive in the world and you could fly anywhere in the world to do a one-on-one with them, like an old 60 Minutes,
Oof.
Who would you pick? Anybody.
That is a question.
Political, religious, entertainment, sports.
Question.
Does not matter.
I think I would like to interview Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Just because he is a fascinating individual, and I think that that'd be a good chat. Alive or dead?
No, live, because we're doing live news. Because I picked up on how you hate doing those live reads, so we're going to make this fun. Everyone, all my other guests, I say alive or dead, but for you, I'm going alive, and it's going to be a live cross.
Okay. Just the way I like it.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to chat to Barack Obama. I think he was just a brilliant individual, putting to one side political thoughts and leanings. Fascinating individual, fascinating upbringing. Yeah. Elon Musk, Barack Obama, and I'd be pretty satisfied. Hopefully I don't die on the air.
Mate, we're going to wind us up by saying, Cameron, how do people find Lead Story, and how do they get in contact with you if they want to have you on their show?
Sure. We're easy to find, www.leadstory.com. We'll be on the App Store as Lead Story next month, and on your TV, Samsung and LG by the end of the year. And if you want me on your show, we've got a contact page on the website. Feel free. Loved doing this, Rob. I really appreciate it. And it's a bit weird being the one being asked questions, but that was fun.
Mate, it's been absolutely awesome chatting to you, mate. I hope people get a lot about your journey along the way. I think it's fantastic you've backed yourself. I can see this being an absolute hit, and we wish you all the success. And as we say to everyone at the end of our show, have a groovy day.